yeah. Whenever I say this story about power metal, I always try to explain we don't mean to be offensive when we say we don't recognize ourselves as 100% power
Yeah.
metal band. And it's no offense. I love power metal. I love many power metal bands.
Hmm.
It's just when I try to explain this, I say, imagine my band, imagine Labyrinth in this case,
Yeah.
put on 100% power metal festival band.
Yeah.
We will be a bit out of the contest, if you know what I mean, because
Hmm.
you will probably have all the other bands playing what you call power metal, and then there will be us. And depending on which songs we choose for the set list, we may even sound completely out of contest. So, uh, it's not. Sometimes I even say maybe it's our flow. It's not always a good point to be so different, to have so many different music influences. Even the pop, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily offensive. Roberto has always had a very pop flavor in his voice, in his melodies,
Hmm.
and there's nothing bad about it unless you really turn into a pop a pop metal band,
Yeah.
which what we always try to avoid. And with this last album, we try to make it even stronger. I mean, the differences between his voice, his style, and the guitars, which, as I always repeat, are the main structure behind the Labyrinth songs.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, you guys are just have a different sound than a lot of these other bands do, and I think that over the years your songwriting in a lot of the in pretty much Vision Divine in this band, it's always been a mix of a lot of that stuff, and even like the last Vision Divine album that came out last year. Again, I thought it was probably a little bit of a heavier album in a lot of ways than say some of the other stuff you've done before. So it's like the songwriting sort of like naturally progressed into that. Just kind of what how I evaluated it when I heard it. And I remember the first album when it came out. I remember the first Labyrinth album, and the bands have obviously progressed a lot since then. Uh,
Thank you.
and and I think that when it comes to your songwriting, I just think that you've always kind of had that little bit of diversity in it. But the new album is, like I said, is a pretty heavy record. I think it progresses, a little bit. Like Welcome to the Absurd Circus sounded like a little bit of a heavier album, but this album
Yeah,
kind of goes further with that, and that's
definitely,
how I look at it.
definitely. Yeah. It's a reaction, as I told you. It's mostly there are many reasons behind it, of course, and of
Hmm.
course the main reason is we like what we write,
Sure.
but the background is like this is a retaliation to the situations around us.
Right.
What people call to be power metal nowadays has no guitars, basically. Guys, I want to be. I don't want to sound like a true defender, but I listen to the new releases and I say, where are the guitars?
Hmm.
It's only dance and pop keyboards played around, and sometimes when we play festivals, these keyboards are not even on stage. So
Right.
it's this is everything but what metal was supposed to be when we started playing music. I play heavy metal because I'm a guitarist. I love guitars,
Right.
and this is our statement to say, okay, as we sang in Architecture of a God, we belong to yesterday. We come from a different era, and this era was made of guitars, heavy guitars.
Yeah.
And if this isn't clear enough with this album, let's push even further on this.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because that album, we had Return to Heaven Denied Part Two, but yeah, Architecture of a God, I think, is kind of where the band it started really getting a lot heavier as far as what you're explaining, what you're alluding to, in the fact that you have more heavier songs on the record, and it's kind
Yeah,
of progressed from there. Um, and it's interesting you mentioned, the band's been around a while. I remember in the late '90s when you started out, it was a much different time, but power metal
completely.
was actually starting to come back, and
Yeah.
you were definitely a part of that. You had, Labyrinth was a band that was really starting that, and I'm talking about Italian bands. You had all these power metal bands like Domine, and then you had
Yeah.
Rhapsody was starting to become a thing. And what was that like? Like, what was that time like now or back then compared to now? Like, if you were kind of coming up, Return to Heaven Denied was a big record. The Sons of Thunder thing was a little crazy because there was a whole big controversy
Yeah.
over the mix of the record, but it was a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of time.
Uh,
Yeah, it was coming back, and now, here we are 25, 26 years later. How have things changed for you guys? I mean, do you still, how do you feel as musicians now after doing this for so long? What's the
let me
scene like
let me
then?
let me try to tell you a funny story which may explain our constant feeling about the whole story you mentioned.
Sure.
When we released Return to Heaven Denied, uh, the album has been released in '98, but we recorded in '97,
Hmm.
and we started writing it in '96. It's even scary to say this. It's almost 28, 29 years ago.
It's a long time ago.
There was no word anything like power metal. Power metal was American US metal.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning power metal, the first band coming to my mind was Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
There was Halloween already around, but there was no word as power metal, such as power metal.
Yeah.
And when Return to Heaven Night was ready, even Metal Blade was preparing the first promotion advertisements, and
Right.
it was supposed to be called melodic speed metal.
Okay.
So that's what we were supposed to be playing, like
Right.
a little neoclassical, sometimes a little progressive, sometimes there was the word progressive, there was melodic, there was neoclassical even, but no power metal. Then, as the album was packed and ready, as you mentioned, bands like Hammerfall, Rhapsody, Gamma Ray, they started bringing this new word. People started describing this as power metal.
Right.
And we were listening to them because even the label started mentioning us as a power metal band, and we said we feel closer to bands like Judas Priest than Halloween. That doesn't mean Halloween are not good. Halloween are wonderful. We are fans of Halloween. We love Halloween. But my music, guitar wise, is much closer to heavy metal bands like Judas Priest, much more than, I mean, comparing bands like Hammerfall.
Yeah.
And that's what we have always been living. We always somehow been struggling to state we are a heavy metal band. It's maybe call us melodic, call us power metal, call us as you like, but especially when you come to see us live, you will notice our attitude and our sound is much more heavy metal than rather than power metal.
Yeah. It's interesting because you talk about power metal being a U.S. thing. You guys did a Sanctuary cover on the EP, and a Timeless Crime EP. I remember that Die for My
Yeah,
Sins, and
Die for my kingdom,
yeah,
and you would know the title, Refuge Denied and
yeah,
Return to Heaven Denied doesn't sound like there's some inspiration even in the title of the album.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because you would consider, if you were going to say power metal, Sanctuary would have been one of those bands that
Yeah,
somebody would have said is power metal. And then the term that you are talking about, when you talk about gamma ray and hammerfall and
yeah,
stuff like that, then they're always,
European.
yeah, in Europe, then there was American power metal and then there's European power metal, and people put
Yeah,
them in two different
exact.
categories. Hey, everybody. Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching. And if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.